They didn't just take land. They took my grandfather's barn, my wife's farm stand, 3 generations of calloused hands and early mornings, and they wrapped it all in a shiny phrase: public good. I'm Cole Hartman, 58 years old, third-generation farmer. And the day this all started, I was standing in my field watching bulldozers nose up to the barn my grandfather Walter Hartman built in 1947. Rough, cut beams he milled himself, roof I'd patched 100 times, wood that smelled like diesel, hay, and my entire childhood. And leaning against a silver Mercedes at the property line was Corinne Aldrich, president of the Riverton City Council, sipping some designer latte, sunglasses on, like this was just another ribbon cutting. She'd offered me $425,000 for Hartman Farm, 87 acres in Briarfield County out in the Iron Belt region, land the county had appraised at nearly double that, land my grandfather bought with Army savings, land my father Raymond expanded, land my wife Lena turned into a farm stand people drove an hour to visit. And when I told Corinne no, she called me provincial, smiled for the local paper, then pushed an eminent domain order through in 3 weeks flat, and slapped her father's name on the replacement, Aldrich Heritage Dog Park. On paper, my farm became a recreation zone. In my chest, it felt like a death notice. The certified letter came on a Tuesday that smelled like rain and diesel. Public use, fair compensation, all those clean legal words wrapped around a dirty truth. A $2.3 million dog park contract handed to Aldrich Civic Development LLC, owned by her husband Graham Aldrich, with a neat little cut of bond money parked in administrative fees. I hired Miles Donnelly, meanest property attorney in the county, and after a week digging through fast-tracked hearings, shortened comment periods, and a rubber-stamp environmental report written in 3 days by one of Corinne's college friends, he looked at me over his glasses and said, "Cole, this is rigged top to bottom. They decided before they told you. 90 days, they said. 90 days to walk away from the soil where my grandfather cleared stumps with a mule, where my father taught me soil is living, where Lena used to hum while stacking tomatoes at dawn. I watched survey crews pound neon stakes into the ground, watched Corinne's nephew swagger around telling me they were preparing for transition, watched my irrigation line mysteriously fail and drown part of my crop, read the Riverton Chronicle calling me a stubborn old farmer blocking children and puppies. They thought I'd just lie down and let the machines roll. But that same anger that kept me upright after Lena died lit up in my chest. And the day after the council's final vote, I drove to the county building, spent 8 hours in a records basement that smelled like mildew and old ink. And that's where I found the first crack in Corinne's beautiful little project. The farm touched County Route 19A on one side, a skinny, restricted strip of asphalt that couldn't legally handle heavy construction trucks or daily dog park traffic, and every other way in or out crossed private land. A strip of forgotten apple trees now called the Breslin Orchard Tract, the abandoned Langford homestead, and scrubby frontage used as a service lane to Earl Jennings' ranch along Carson Ridge Service Lane. Old easements from the 50s and 70s gave my family the right to cross those places back when neighbors shook hands instead of sending emails. But here's the thing my father used to grumble about. Paper rights expire if you don't babysit them. When I traced the filings forward, I realized those easements were dead, never renewed, never updated, no longer binding on the current owners. And that meant something simple and devastating. If I controlled those 3 parcels, Aldrich Heritage Dog Park would be in $2.3 million islands surrounded by my land and by roads I owned, reachable only by a narrow county strip that couldn't legally carry the machines they needed or the cars they promised. For the first time since that letter hit my mailbox, I smiled. Not a happy smile. The kind a chess player makes when he finally sees the checkmate forming 6 moves out. I started on the north side, with the Breslin Orchard Tract, 3 acres of aging apple trees, and an owner, Trudy Breslin, who was getting ready to move to Florida and listed the land for more than it was worth. I sat at her kitchen table, drank weak coffee, listened to her talk about aching knees and wanting out of the winter, and when she told me the price, I didn't haggle. "I'll take it. Cash, 3 weeks," I said. We shook hands, the old kind of deal. I didn't buy it as Cole Hartman. I used a shell company called Riverton Land and Stewardship LLC, something I'd learned watching Corinne and Graham hide contracts behind corporate names, and when the deed transferred, It barely made a whisper in the county logbook. No one sends out balloons when a tiny holding changes hands, especially not to a city council president who thinks she already owns the map. The Langford homestead took a different trick. The place was dead, owner gone, no heirs, the county holding a $22,000 tax lien like a hot coal they wanted to drop. I'd once skimmed some article in one of Lena's finance magazines about tax lien investing. Thought it was something big, city people did, but turns out counties in trouble love anyone who'll pay them back. I bought the lien, filed a quiet title action when nobody showed up to contest it, and 6 weeks later, my second anonymous LLC held the deed. The last piece, the scrubby strip along Carson Ridge Service Lane, belonged to Earl Jennings, 71, poker buddy of Corinne, proud of it. He wouldn't sell to me if I walked up and waved cash in his face. But Earl didn't know my daughter. My girl Brooke flew in from Chicago, corporate finance brain, blazer pressed, hair sharp, and created a third company on her laptop in a single evening. Next morning, she knocked on Earl's door as a vacation property investor, talked about cabins and short-term rentals and the potential of those 12 useless acres. Earl puffed his chest, dropped his price a little to impress her, and signed. 3 sides closed, 3 deeds in the hands of 3 quiet LLCs, all funded with everything left from Lena's insurance and my savings. When the last paper was signed, I sat in my truck in the fading light, did the math. Nearly $300,000 spent, less than $60,000 left liquid, and felt that familiar copper taste of risk in my mouth. It wasn't a safe play, but it was the only one that felt like looking my grandfather in the eye and not flinching. While I'd been quietly buying the county out from under her, Corinne had been staging her victory tour. Bulldozers parked just off my line. Press conference about transforming backward farmland into a modern hub. Quotes in the paper calling our town stagnant and in need of vision. The Riverton Chronicle running photos of kids with leashes and headlines blaming a stubborn landowner for delaying progress. Code enforcement suddenly found problems at a little rental cottage I owned. Fence too tall, mailbox slightly out of line, downspouts aiming wrong. Anonymous tips had state environmental inspectors digging in my soil for chemicals I hadn't used in 12 years. Her husband's firm sent a lowball offer to buy my 3 LLCs, half what I'd paid, dressed up as a solution. She wanted me squeezed on all sides. Money, reputation, patience. But I had something she didn't know about. Time and kids who were done watching their father get pushed around. Brooke sat at my kitchen table with her laptop and a pot of coffee going cold, pulled every public document on Aldrich Heritage Dog Park, bond filings, LLC registrations, contracts, and 3 hours in, she pushed back from her screen, eyes sharp. "Dad," she said, "they didn't even hide this well. The construction contract? $2.3 million to Aldrich Civic Development LLC, 60% owned by Graham Aldrich, 40% by a trust with Corinne's name buried 2 steps down. The project's bond issue? $3.1 million, with $2.3 million budgeted for actual work and $800,000 marked as administrative, half of which went to a shell consulting firm tied to Corinne's old law partner, and a ridiculous $120,000 expedited environmental report written in 3 days. Any taxpayer can request a bond audit," Brooke explained, typing as she spoke. "You trigger that, the state auditor and the attorney general have to look, and it's an election year. They'd love this." Meanwhile, Miles drafted a federal lawsuit arguing that the city used eminent domain to target an active, productive farm while ignoring vacant lots and idle developments. Discriminatory, biased, a civil rights angle backed by Corinne's own words about simple farm folks needing to sacrifice. He talked to the ACLU, and they smelled blood too. Proof of corruption in the funding. A lawsuit with teeth. And then, right when I thought the arsenal was full, guilt knocked on my door. One evening, Logan Price, the survey crew chief and Corinne's nephew, showed up on my porch looking like he hadn't slept in days. His wife was pregnant, he said, and he couldn't live with what he'd done. He had text messages, voice recordings, orders from Corinne herself telling him to accidentally damage my irrigation line. To make it clear, I was in the way. He slid a signed statement across my table with trembling hands. "She's family," he said, "but this isn't right. I want my kid to grow up knowing I at least tried to fix it." I sent his statement straight to Miles, who locked it down and just smiled that slow lawyer smile. "We'll use this," he said, at exactly the worst possible moment for her. I sold my tractor, the old John Deere my father taught me to drive, sold equipment that had been part of my life longer than my own knees had worked right, even sold Lena's farm, stand gear, and donated that money to the food bank in her name, because if we were going to war, I wanted my side funded and my conscience clean. Then we built the play that would flip everything. Federal lawsuit to stall the second eminent domain grab on my access roads. Formal complaints and a bond audit request to the state attorney general. Exclusive evidence to an investigative reporter named Jordan Pike at Channel 12 Action News. Release time for the morning of Karen's big groundbreaking. And while all that moved through channels, I put up 8-foot chain link fence around the 3 parcels I'd bought, citing agricultural use and livestock containment. Watching as Aldridge Heritage Dog Park became, visually, what it was legally, a very expensive, very empty idea surrounded by someone else's gates. Karen tried one last play the night my storage barn burned. I woke to that wrong kind of smoke, not wood stove or brush pile, but chemical and hot. Ran out to see flames licking up the side of the building that held old records, family photos, Lena's wedding dress in a plastic bag I'd never had the courage to open again. The fire department saved the shell, but half of what was inside turned to char and warped memories. The security camera I'd installed on Miles' advice caught a hooded figure pouring accelerant, a truck tied through 3 shell companies back to Graham's business web. I didn't call the local cops right away. I sent the footage to Miles, to Brooke, to Jordan Pike, added it to the pile of things we were saving for the moment when running wouldn't help them anymore. 2 days later, Karen herself rolled up in that Mercedes, heels sinking into my gravel, sunglasses in the shade. She stood there in front of the blackened barn and offered me $1.2 million in cash for everything. The farm, the LLC parcels, my silence, plus an NDA that would erase my right to ever talk about any of it. I had my phone recording in my pocket, and I can still hear her voice. "I've built my career on this project, Cole. I will not let one stubborn farmer destroy me." I looked past her at the scorched boards, at the spot where Lena once tripped and laughed and threw a tomato at me, and I felt something inside me settle. Not rage, exactly. Just decision. "I'm not destroying you," I told her quietly. "You already did that. I'm just letting the lights come on." 3 days before the groundbreaking, a clerk from City Hall, Paula Green, sent Miles a packet of internal emails. Karen ordering documents shredded, pressuring Logan to recant, acknowledging the access problem weeks before and deciding to deal with it later. Witness tampering, obstruction, you name it. By then, the machinery we'd set in motion was humming. The Attorney General's office had opened an investigation into the bonds, subpoenas were drafted, the ACLU had joined our lawsuit, and Jordan had written and fact-checked a brutal piece about self-dealing and land theft, scheduled to hit the web at 5 a.m. the morning Karen expected to stand with a gold shovel and cameras rolling. She tried to move the ceremony, tried to bully a county commissioner named Nolan Briggs into letting her bulldoze a temporary road over public land, tried to push the local news into delaying Jordan's story. By then it was too late. Pride wouldn't let her cancel. The dominoes were already falling. The morning of the groundbreaking dawned cold and bright. At the only legal entrance, the narrow mouth of County Route 19A, I stood by a locked gate on the strip I owned, with the deed in my hand. Behind me, members of the Riverton Land Rights Coalition, small business owners Karen had steamrolled, seasonal workers, neighbors with placards showing black and white photos of Hartman Farm through the decades. News vans from Channel 12 Action News and 2 other stations lined the shoulder. The sheriff's cruiser sat off to the side, a manila envelope on the passenger seat that I knew carried Karen's subpoena from the Attorney General. Her Mercedes pulled up late, alone. She stepped out in a perfect suit, makeup laid on like armor, and for a half-second I saw her eyes when they landed on the fences, the cameras, the protesters, the sheriff, that flash of panic before the politician's smile snapped into place. "Mr. Hartman," she called, walking toward me. "Open this gate. This is a public event." I held up the deed for the cameras to see. "This is a private road, Karen. You want through, you need an easement. You don't have one." She hissed back that the city had eminent domain, that she'd have me arrested for obstruction. The city attorney Miles had been sparring with stepped up and murmured in her ear, and I watched her face lose a shade of color as he confirmed in front of everyone that their second eminent domain attempt was frozen by our federal injunction, that the state investigation meant they couldn't bulldoze their way out of this. She spun to the cameras, tried one more time to paint me as the greedy villain, but the narrative had already shifted. Jordan's article had dropped at dawn, full of contract excerpts, bond tables, email quotes, and every reporter on that roadside had read it in the van. I cut in over her speech. "Let's talk about greed," I said, and listed the numbers out loud. The $800,000 in bond money parked in admin and funneled to friends, the contract to Aldridge Civic Development LLC, the environmental study paid at 4 times the going rate, the arson camera footage now in the hands of the AG. Then the sheriff walked up, the gravel crunching under his boots loud in the TV mics, and handed Karen her subpoena. Behind him, Logan Price stepped forward with his lawyer, told the cameras he had recordings of Karen ordering sabotage on my land, said he was cooperating with the investigation. Something in her broke right there, in front of everyone. She lunged at him, shouting about witch hunts and conspiracies, and the sheriff had to steady her by the elbow while the mayor, suddenly very interested in his shoes, mumbled something about letting the process play out. When it finally quieted, I turned to the crowd, to the cameras, to the people who'd been told for months that I was the one blocking their future. I didn't fight to stop a dog park, I told them, voice shaky but steady. I fought to stop a government that thinks taking what it wants and paying itself on the way out is just progress. Then I laid down my last card. "I'm willing to donate these access parcels," I said, holding up the stack of deeds, "to the county. On one condition. This land and my farm are locked into agricultural and community use forever. A teaching farm, community gardens, a real market, and every dollar stolen here gets audited, recovered, and put back into this town. Or the gates stay closed, and this $2.3 million vanity project rots behind my fences." Commissioner Nolan Briggs didn't even hesitate. "You've got my vote," he said into a live microphone. "And I suspect the council's going to fall in line once they see the charges the state is drafting." Within a week, Karen resigned from the Riverton City Council, under investigation for fraud, self-dealing, and obstruction. Her husband's company lost the contract and most of its others. The eminent domain order on Hartman Farm was rescinded. Our new agricultural trust, the Lena Hartman Land and Learning Foundation, took legal ownership of the land, wrote into its charter that it would never be paved, never be flipped, only farmed, taught from, and opened to the community. Today, where her dog park signs once promised artificial turf and sponsorship plaques, there are raised beds full of tomatoes and peppers, a Saturday market under a pavilion, and a small fenced dog run that actually fits next to something useful, a place fam. Elise come to eat, learn, and remember how food really grows. Some evenings I walk the rows at sunset, dirt under my nails, hearing Lena in the wind and my grandfather in the quiet of the soil, and I know we didn't just win a fight. We put something right that had been wrong for a long time. So tell me this. If a council president like Karen tried to pave over your family's history in the name of progress, and you had the chance to both stop her and force the system to answer for what it did, how far would you go? And where's the line between justice and revenge when it's your name written in the dirt?